Hey, welcome to First Look. Thanks for being back here again this week. And it's in a very exciting time because this time you and I get to enter into the season of Lent. A season of love and joy. No, that's not it. It's a season. It's a season of contemplation, reflection, and working our stuff out, which frankly we all need from time to time, which is why we have it every year. So this week we're going back to a story that you know really well and that I know really well, which again I absolutely always love to do because when you get to a place where you're revisiting these stories, and especially with the same group of people, like this is going to be our blank time around with the temptation of Jesus story. But I there is always something really special about that rhythm, and that's part of it. I think that every year we come to a place where, like, when we do the same thing in Advent, we come to a place where we need these kind of tethering points, and we do that in Advent with hope and peace and joy and love. We repeat those kind of cycles, and sometimes we use different phrases, but those ideas still come out. And we started something here, at least in my tenure, um, where instead of an Advent wreath, we have a Lenten cross. And so you'll notice for this first Sunday in Lent that there's a cross up there in the front of the sanctuary, and we light a candle at each place along the way. And we do that until Palm Sunday, and we have it up there for Palm Sunday and then Holy Week. And there's absolutely nothing liturgical about that whatsoever. That is just been made up something, and you all are good enough to follow along. And I'm sure that the moment that you all kick me out of here, that will be the last that you see of the cross, which is perfectly fine. But it's just the thing. I liked the kind of mirror image that is for the Advent wreath and the cross. I like the image of that, and so it's something we've kind of adopted here, and you all have allowed me to do, and it's up now, and we're ready to go. So, but it gives us something to kind of hold on to, because even though we're gonna enter into that time, Advent is about waiting and looking ahead, and Lent is more about reflecting, looking back and taking stock, thinking about maybe the places where we can get back on a better path. Um, I like to have those things in place that kind of make it feel like it's a part of that. It's like familiar signposts along the way as you're moving through something. You walk a trail in the woods and you've walked it before, but you're going to notice something differently this time. And that's a lot what we're doing in this season. And every year is a little different because you see something from a slightly different perspective, or something wonderful happened this year, or something tragic happened this year, or some combination of those things. And so you're never going to go into looking at those moments exactly the same. So that's what we get to do together. And it starts in just a couple days in Ash Wednesday. And I'm hoping that you all can join us for that. And yeah, it's it's a good time for us to be able to gather, to sit with something, and to reimagine how God might be leading us in this season. So this is Matthew chapter 4, and I'm going to move us into the passage itself. Again, it is one that you know. Let's see here. This will always take me a minute because, of course, I'm doing it on my phone. There we go. So Matthew, just as a reminder, first we start with we've already gotten to the infant story of Jesus. We've gotten through the piece about John the Baptist and him pointing to Jesus as the Messiah, and the baptism of Jesus. So then right after that, we move right into the temptation. And I think, excuse me, we one of the things that we tend to do is that when we look at this story, one of the things that we often kind of point at is the way that the temptation story kind of reminds us of the Garden of Eden. It reminds us of the temptation by the serpent. It reminds us of Adam and Eve. You know, it's kind of that pivot point from when this worked to now it not working, right? It's like completing a loop. And that's a really interesting kind of thing to play around with and to think through. And that's the Old Testament passage for this week, the one that complements. It's Genesis 3, verses 1 through 7. So if you want to look back in that and kind of hold both of those passages up at the same time, then that works. So when we think about this passage and we have that in mind, we start to look at and think about those themes of how we begin this journey of sin, to put it very plainly, and then in what ways does Jesus close that loop, and how this actually begins that. So what I mean is, you have this moment, Jesus is baptized, he goes out into the wilderness, and then what he's preparing himself to do is to be the resurrection. And so we go from this moment of sin, temptation, and we've certainly talked about many times, what does it mean for Jesus to be tempted, and how does that work out if you're God, and how does that work out if you're human? And so we wrestle with those kind of things, but it leads us to resurrection, and that's where we're eventually headed. But we know that in the meantime, we need to sit with the harder parts of that. And so, but we have, in the beginning, we start with this kind of hopefulness where we see the beginning, we see Adam and Eve, and we see the fruit, and we see the serpent, and we see that moment of deception, and we see that that same kind of attempt at deception. Surely you will not be like this. Surely it would not go the way that God is saying it will go. Surely you have enough agency to do this right, and you don't have to worry about the things that God is saying that you should be worrying about. And Jesus, of course, has an answer for that each and every time. And in the past, the things that I've talked about is, what I really value about this passage is the way that it kind of looks at things that we all are dealing with. Jesus is tempted with a sense of just survival. We're tempted to do the things that will mean benefit for us in the short term. We're tempted with security, that kind of safety. Like, we can create a world where we are insulated from the things that that could harm us, and thus we ignore the needs of others. And Jesus is tempted with power, and that, of course, is a struggle. And you might be thinking to yourself, I don't think of myself as someone who really cares about power. Well, if you spend any time on a church committee, or in a small group, or in a social club, or as a parent, or in a family, good gracious, power dynamics are a part of all of that. So, sometimes I've looked at this passage through those eyes. This year I'm going to do something a little bit different, and I don't know that I have a clever title for it or anything, but although I'm not very good at titles anyway, just called Confessions. And so it's really me working my stuff out in front of you, I guess, a little bit. Uh, and so this first week is called Confessions. I am tempted to dot dot dot, and it's going to look at a little bit of like where I feel like what I struggle with in terms of where I feel like I'm tempted to go or not go. When do I go too far or not far enough? And maybe just see where that goes. It could be interesting. I'm going to kind of let the week dictate how that looks, but that's where I'm going to go with. So it's sort of a time of confession for me, hoping that it might be something that either you can relate to or maybe can help with. That'd be fine. Or if nothing else, understand. I can see how a person could get there, and maybe that's helpful because maybe you have other people in your life that are going through the same thing I'm going through. So, one second, finding passage again. So anyway, here's the passage. Let's look at it, and then see where we end up. Matthew chapter 4. Then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. He fasted 40 days and 40 nights, and afterwards he was famished. The tempter came and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread." But he answered, "It is written, one does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God." Let me pause there. That's the first temptation. Remember I said it's one way of looking at this is that the first temptation is about what our daily needs, acquiring what's in front of us, acquiring what we need today to move on, and perhaps forgetting the bigger issues at hand. So I think it's interesting to talk about, who is Satan? That's a really big subject, isn't it? The tempter, who is the devil, Satan, all these words and phrases for it, and the serpent, right? If you read enough good authors who are willing to think about all those things critically, you're going to get a lot of different types of answers about that. And you and I, at least within the Presbyterian Church, Reformed Church, that kind of thing, we don't talk about the devil or Satan a whole lot. And the reason for that is that we have enough to worry about as humans than whatever it is that Satan's up to. And, meaning we think about ourselves as those who are responsible for not only the sin that is, the ways we all fall short just within ourselves, but also outside of ourselves, right? The individual versus the collective, the social sin. And that we can use Satan as this sort of scapegoat as well. It's like that because he's out there doing stuff. But Jesus doesn't spend a whole lot of time trying to get you to combat that, if you notice. Much, much more often than not, God is talking about or Jesus is talking about, depending on where you are, what are you doing? Where are you falling short? Not very often. If you look at like the prophets, if you look at, that whole last third of the Old Testament, more times than not, the lament around anything that's going wrong individually or collectively is about, and the people sinned. It's about putting the responsibility on the individual or on the body. And, and we follow that line of thinking. When I say we, I mean a more Presbyterian Reformed way of thinking. Now, we think about evil in the world as a real thing, obviously. But we think more often of the ways that we either help that along or perpetuate that in our own lives. So I think it's interesting to really to name that in this passage. It's one of the few places we actually see this confrontation, and that's present here. So talking about Satan in some personified form may not even really work for you. Maybe it does, but maybe it doesn't. Maybe what you'd rather think about is the places in the world we are tempted by another direction. We are tempted by another way that is not of God, right? Because ultimately I have agency over that. It doesn't say anywhere in the Genesis passage that Adam and Eve were put into a trance. That they were doing something that was against their own will. They may have been deceived, or they may have been taken advantage of. They may have, and we can talk about that. We can talk about the vulnerability that they had and what they were put into. But at no point was it like they were forced to, like puppets or something. And so that we can think about that temptation really coming from within, rather than like scapegoating something else. So anyway, let's pause there. Let's read the rest of the passage. That's kind of where I'm starting. Verse 5. Then the devil took him to the holy city and placed him on the pinnacle of the temple, saying to him, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, He will command His angels concerning you, and on their hands they will bear you up, so that you will not dash your foot against a stone." Jesus said to him, "Again it is written, do not put the Lord your God to the test." So that's the safety aspect, right? That we can be so preoccupied with keeping everything out that we don't allow anything in. And I see that, we've seen that historically in the church, that, well, we don't know you people. You people are different than us. You people are like this. You people. And we create enemies, or we create, invisible walls for people. And that's a little bit of what I talked about yesterday. And it's all under the sort of the idea that we're trying to keep ourselves safe from anything out there that could harm the way we feel about ourselves or whatever. And the other part I find interesting about this passage that I think shows up in these particular verses that I just read is Satan knows his scripture. And I have also taken the tact of looking at this passage from that vantage point, that I know a lot of people who know scripture really well, but that doesn't mean that they know what to do with it, how to use it, when to use it, how to use it faithfully, wisely, with kindness or compassion. Some of you, or one of you, or somewhere along the line has seen people use scripture as a weapon. Maybe in your family, or maybe in a church, or maybe at a funeral, God forbid. That's a reality. And that's something that people in my position who do what I do need to be not only cognizant of, but repentant for. So that's the other part. Beware of those who will quote scripture to you. And then the last part, if I can find it. Here it is, verse 8. Again, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. And he said to him, all these I will give you if you will fall down and worship me. Jesus said to him, away with you, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve only him. Then the devil left him, and suddenly angels came and waited on him. One of the interesting things the third part there is the power element, our seeking of power. And those are the things that we are tempted with the most, with our needs and wants, securing our needs and wants, having more stacked up than our neighbor does, fighting for that sort of emotional security and, superior, inferior, keeping that away, and circles for power. And those are the things that I've certainly done in the past, and they've all been meaningful to me. And I think that this time it's just a time that I feel like you all know me well enough, and I know you well enough to kind of try to have some kind of candid conversations about maybe where we have strayed, or where I have, and see where that goes. Because there are temptations that I face individually that I don't think are necessarily unique to me, but some of them are because of my profession. So let me give you an example. I may or may not use this on Sunday. So one of them is there's a kind of a temptation to be the authority in the room. And that's a strange one. Because, in my position, in a pastor position, you are given some natural authority. You're looked at as the person who knows Scripture, who knows what the right thing to do from a churchy standpoint is. You're handed some of that. You're expected to do that, and that's all well and good. But again, people in my position have taken advantage of that and have gone way too far with it. And even if I like to think that I try to check myself on those things, there are certainly places where I stumble and do the wrong thing. And I want you to see me as someone who knows what he's doing. And some of that's just because I'm going from being a younger person to not, like when you're a pastor who's 31 or 30, whatever, it's hard to get people to think of you as someone who knows anything. And mostly they're right. But I now have to be someone who maybe has his act together a little bit. And some of you are trying to figure out if I do or not, which is fine. But, I don't have to prove anything to anyone. I just have to work with you faithfully, do the best I can, care about you the most genuinely I can, apologize when I'm wrong, and work so that this community can reflect faithfully who God is, as much as I can every day. But, I want you to think of me as a certain thing, as interesting, or as good at something, or as, or maybe even as humble or something. And I think that a lot of us want other people to think of us that way. And life has a way of humiliating you, certainly, and reminding you of your place in the world. But what do we do with those feelings? It's nice when people are nice to you, but what do I do with that feeling? I don't know. And how much time do I spend feeling guilty about it? Or is there a healthy way of doing it? Like, that's the kind of stuff I might be working out with you. Is like, when are you taking pride in something, and when are you being prideful? When are you being um, selfish versus when are you caring for self? That stuff I think about a lot, and it's a part of being in this role, but it's also just a part of being human. That's an example. I don't know which example I'll use, but that's one. So this is confession time, um, and even the confession could end up sounding like, oh, look how humble he is by being willing to be confessional in front of us. It's probably only going to count if you sometimes don't think as much of me as you did before. If you thought anything of me before. Maybe it's only a genuine confession if you think less of me afterwards. I don't know. I'll think about that. That's what I got for this week. I'm working it out. That's why it's a first look. Hopefully I don't get too scared and don't really talk to you. But there's a lot of things I think that I think it's good to. I talk a lot about how congregations and church should be a place where we can be vulnerable and care for each other, and say what it is that's on our heart, and then have the other person actually show you compassion. And maybe I'm putting that to the test. We shall see. Either way, I appreciate you working this out with me. I appreciate you listening to me, and I hope it does something that's positive. I hope that you can join us on Wednesday. I hope that you can join us on Sunday. And I hope that you know that I care about you more than you probably realize. So, I will talk to you next time. Have a very good week, and I'll see you next time for another First Look. Take care.